Part 45. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 442. Tang Ning only said half of what she said, but Chen Huang felt like it hit his heart. As the emperor, he was the richest person in the entire Chen kingdom, and at the same time the poorest person. The Ministry of War needed money, the Ministry of Industry needed money, disaster relief needed money, officials' salaries needed money, and wars needed money. If officials are not paid their salaries and they all starve to death, who will serve the court? If money for disaster relief is not provided, the victims will rebel, and the court will need to invest more money to suppress it. If we don't give them money for the war, the greedy grassland people will take advantage of them. Only by beating them hard and fearing them can the border be stable. Money is needed everywhere, and no matter how full the treasury is, it will never be enough. On weekdays, he saves as much as he can, otherwise he would not agree to have the businessmen organize the 16th Guards competition. It would be good to sell tickets to replenish the national treasury, but there were some problems. He thought about it, looked at Tang Ning and said, "The imperial court has the majesty of the imperial court. How can it be used to replenish the national treasury in this way?" Tang Ning was prepared and added, "Your Majesty, the sales of tickets for the competition are all in the name of the organizer and do not involve the court. The 30% is just the court's tax revenue, and the other 30% is a donation to the Ministry of War." Chen Huang thought for a while and said, 3. Seeing that Emperor Chen was about to bargain, Tang Ning immediately said, "In addition, I have another idea that I would like to ask your Majesty for." Chen Huang was interrupted from his train of thought, looked at him and asked, "What do you think?" Tang Ning said, "The great competition of the 16th Guards is a grand event held every 4 years. Since the imperial court has invited envoys from other countries, why not invite people from all walks of life in the capital to witness the majesty of the 16th Guards and the majesty of the imperial court? His Majesty once said, justice and selflessness can unite all the people with one word. In the 16 Guards grand competition, hundreds of officials, dignitaries, and foreign envoys can be seen. Why are we, the people of Chen State, the only ones who cannot be seen? If His Majesty is extra gracious and invites the people in the capital to watch the ceremony, it will be a pioneering move since the founding of the country. It will help promote justice, make the people united, and the country will be stable." Tang Ning's words made Chen Huang think about it for a long time and temporarily forgot about the tickets. He had not thought about these words, but he also felt that they were very reasonable. This was an opportunity to make the people's hearts return to their hearts, and the people's hearts and minds were one of the things that an emperor longed for most. He looked at Tang Ning with even more satisfaction, not only because he was the rare three-dimensional champion, but also because unlike Fang Jie, everything he did was able to please him. At a certain moment, he thought of something again, looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Justice and selflessness, one word can bring justice to all people. When did I say this?" This sentence is very philosophical and is a famous saying that can be passed down from generation to generation, but Chen Huang cannot remember when he said it. This sentence actually comes from Huinanzi in another world, but it is not in this world's version. Tang Ning didn't believe that Emperor Chen could remember every word he said, so she cupped her hands and said, "This is what your Majesty once taught me, and I still know it now. The memory is still fresh." Chen Huang thought about it carefully and felt that he had some impression, but he didn't seem to have any. He coughed lightly, looked at Wei Jian, and asked, "Have I ever said this?" Wei Jian thought for a while and said, "Your Majesty, maybe, he may have said so." After he finished speaking, he raised his head and saw that Chen Huang was still looking at him. After being stunned for a moment, he immediately understood, looked at Hanlin beside him, and said, "Write it down. The emperor's classic sayings must be recorded and preserved. Otherwise, thousands of years later, how will others know which emperor said just and selfless, one word can bring peace to all people? Tang Ning stood below and watched quietly. In order to change the subject, she gave this famous quote to Chen Huang to satisfy his fragile vanity. It was worth it. Emperor Chen watched with satisfaction as the Hanlin Academy officials finished recording, then looked at Tang Ning again and said, "I am very pleased that you can remember my teachings. I will leave this matter to you." Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, "I will live up to your Majesty's trust. In addition, I am also sure about the tickets." Huang Chen looked at him and said, "You have the heart to share my worries and always think about reducing the pressure on the national treasury. It's good. You should always think about this in the future." Tang Ning said, "Please remember." Emperor Chen nodded and said, "From now on, you can make your own decisions regarding the 16th Guards competition. There is no need to report all big and small matters to me. If there is nothing else, you can go back first." After Tang Ning left, Chen Huang carefully thought about what he just said and murmured, "Why don't I remember at all? Did I say that sentence before? Your Majesty has so many things to do, so naturally it is impossible to remember every word." Wei Jian said with a smile, "However, since Master Tang has said it, your Majesty must have said it, and he will not make up such a sentence to deceive your Majesty." "That's not the case." Chen Huang shook his head and said, "How can there be such boring people in this world?" He stood up, walked around the hall, and said slowly, "It's not a bad thing that he knows business. If he takes care of all the royal family's properties, maybe the national treasury will not be short of money in the future." Although the imperial court did not attach great importance to merchants, it would still engage in some commercial activities from a national perspective, such as salt and iron franchises, and there was also an officially operated brothel and shoe pavilion in Beijing. After Chen Huang finished speaking, he shook his head and said, "However, this is overkill. It is better to let him travel more in the court and play more roles." Tang Ning walked in the palace and successfully completed her mission. He had seen a greedy rich man and a greedy rich man's daughter, and never thought there was a greedy emperor. After getting to know Emperor Chu and Emperor Chen, he deeply realized that the so-called emperor was actually an ordinary person. Emperor Chen was greedy for money, and Emperor Chu the emperor is stingy. With his vanity satisfied, Chen Huang completely delegated power to him, and he no longer needed to report to him for anything in the future. This was an extra bonus, but what needed to be done was almost done, so he would let it work on its own. He walked out of the imperial study room and passed through several palaces. His expression suddenly changed, and he turned his head and looked to the other side. From a certain palace on his left, several figures walked out. Tang Ning's eyes stayed on the leader, watching her slowly walk over. Gong Sunying looked at him and said, "Master Tang, we meet again." When Gong Sunying was transferred from the county jail to the criminal department, she still had shackles on her feet and hands. These things were gone now. She didn't look like a prisoner at all. Gong Sunying looked at him, smiled and asked, "Are you surprised?" Tang Ning did not deny it, but nodded and said, "It's a bit unexpected." Gong Sunying looked at him and said, "I never thought that His Majesty the Emperor of your country would be so interested in the art of poisonous poison." Although Tang Ning was surprised to see her in the palace, she was not shocked. The fact that she was able to gain the trust of the Wanyan department as a Han nationality already speaks volumes about her abilities. Thinking about it this way, it is not that surprising that she could turn around in this situation. This fully shows that if you can travel around the world and understand a rare technology, you can indeed do better than ordinary people. Gong Sunying looked at him and said, "I can't leave the palace. Please help me bring a message to my senior sister." Tang Ning glanced at him and said, "Am I familiar with you?" "We don't have any deep hatred." Gong Sunying looked at him and said, "I once wanted to deal with you, but along the way, you should have come back with revenge. We are even, and I will never fight with you again." "Enemy." She glanced at Tang Ning and said, "Tell her for me that you don't have to think about rescuing me. Besides, Time will prove that my original choice was the right one. After she finished speaking, she walked in the direction Tang Ning came from. This woman was quite capable of making her own decisions. Tang Ning glanced at her back and turned to leave. Natural home. Su Mei was sitting at the table, writing something. When Tang Ning came in, she didn't stop and said, "I still have some things to do, so please sit down for a while." Tang Ning sat opposite her and said, "Are you free tonight? Let's go to your house for a meal with my mother." He had promised to bring Zhao Man here, but he never had the chance. He might as well go back with them. Anyway, with Su Mei here, others would not misunderstand him. An old woman named Bai Jin walked in from outside the door and said, "She has something to do tonight." "Oh, really?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "I just came back from the palace and met Gong Soon Jin. She asked me to bring you a message." The old woman strode over and asked, "What are you talking about?" She said. Tang Ning scratched her head and said, "Ah, I accidentally forgot. My memory has been getting worse and worse recently." The old woman looked at him, then at Su Mei, and said, "She will be fine tonight." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 443. The 441st chapter of the main text of Ruyi Xiaolang Jun. Su Mei's master is quite sensible. Tang Ning likes to deal with such smart people. Your sister said that she is doing well in the palace and does not need you to save her. He looked at the old woman and said, "In addition, she also asked me to tell you that time will prove that her original choice was the right one." Is she afraid of ruining her business? The old woman looked gloomy, snorted coldly, and said, "It's too early to say who is right and who is wrong. Although Gong Sun Ying's Gu technique is powerful, there are many masters around Chen Huang, and she can't make any waves. Maybe one day Chen Huang will not be so curious about Gu techniques, and he can make her disappear completely with a wave of his hand." Tang Ning is actually a little curious about the affairs of this pair of sisters, but whether he asks Gong Sun Ying or the old woman, they will definitely not tell, so he didn't make himself unhappy. On the way back together, he sat in the carriage, looked at Su Mei and asked, "What are they talking about, right and wrong? What exactly do they mean?" Su Mei shook her head and said, "I don't know. Before you came back from Chu, I didn't even know I had an uncle. This old woman is mysterious, and her plan must be bad." Tang Ning can't control what they want to do, but Su Mei is by her side, so he can't help but pay attention. Su Mei saw his thoughts, rolled her eyes at him, and said, "Don't worry, I will take care of myself." Compared to the deserted Tianrunju, the Tang family is much more lively. Princess Anyang has integrated Xiru and Xiaoi into the circle of celebrities in the capital, and they have some contacts on weekdays. Even if Tang Ning is not there, they will not be bored. Sister Su, today they are all at home. Xiaoi and Xiru walked up and greeted Su Mei first. Seeing that there was no one around, they looked at her side and whispered, "Mother." Tang Ning walked back to the study and tapped the left wall 6 times, 3 slow and 3 quick. This was the code they agreed on. Not long after, Zhao Man came over from the princess's house. She walked to Tang Ning's side, blushing, and whispered, "I missed you." This was outside, and Tang Ning couldn't do anything, just smiled and said, "I'll take you to see someone." Zhao Man asked in confusion, "Who?" Tang Ning said, "You'll know in a while." Tang Ning took Zhao Man into the room. Tang Yu came up to them, looked at Zhao Man, and asked, "Is this the princess? I saw her once in the palace when I was a child. I didn't expect her to grow up so big in the blink of an eye." Zhao Man looked at Tang Ning and whispered, "She is." Tang Ning whispered a few words in her ear. Zhao Man was stunned for a moment, her face suddenly turned red, her hands pinched the corners of her clothes unconsciously, and whispered, "Uncle, Aunt." Tang Yu took her hand and said, "Come in and talk." The women were all in the room. There were no outsiders in the room, and there was no taboo. Tang Ning was not needed in such an occasion. He came to the yard and saw Qing'er eating melon seeds. He grabbed some from her hand and sat next to her to eat them together. Tang Yaoyao came over from the wall, looked in the direction of the house, and asked, "What are you doing inside? It's so lively." Tang Ning was too lazy to explain, and said, "You will know if you go and see." Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and walked over there in confusion. Qing'er looked at the courtyard wall, cracking melon seeds while saying, "Son-in-law, why don't we tear down that wall?" Qing'er had a habit of cracking melon seeds. She would first crack a bunch of melon seeds and then eat them together. Tang Ning took advantage of her inattention and secretly pinched some of the seeds she had peeled. She asked calmly, "Why tear it down?" Qing'er said, "Sister Yao Yao and son-in-law don't go out anyway. Aren't they tired of turning over and over every day? It's better to tear it down." That's not the right way to say it. Although they don't have the habit of going out, the meaning of the wall being there or not is completely different. The wall stood there, indicating that he and Tang Yaoyao were two families. In this way, even if he climbed over the wall and was seen by the rich man Tang, he would not be too angry. If he directly tore down the wall, the rich man Tang would have to fight him to death. In some ways, the rich man Tang was as stingy as Prince Xian. Stinginess is the nature of businessmen, which can be seen from the fact that he often corrected Tang Ning. Tang Ning explained, "Yao Yao's father won't agree." "Oh." Qing'er nodded, ready to pour the melon seeds on the paper into her hands and eat them together. After looking down, she looked up at Tang Ning and asked, "Son-in-law, did you steal my melon seeds?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "No." Qing'er crossed her arms and looked at him with eyes that saw through everything. Tang Yaoyao liked to cross her arms, but she didn't have the foundation, so there was not much change before and after doing this action. Qing'er was different. She had a good foundation to begin with. In the past 2 years since moving to the capital, I don't know if it was secondary growth or something else, but there were new changes almost every day. Among the people in the Tang family, she was considered young, but her figure was indeed the most prominent. I'm afraid she was not much inferior to Lan Lan. Moreover, because she was petite, the contrast between the two made her stand out more. In addition, her slightly immature face was exactly the type that some men liked the most. Qing'er looked at him helplessly, put the remaining melon seeds in his palm, and said, "Master, if you want to eat them, just tell me. I will not refuse you. Don't forget, I am the young lady's maid." Qing'er still had the consciousness to be a maidservant, so she took out a handful of melon seeds and said, "You eat the ones I peeled first, and then I'll peel them for you." Tang Yaoyao walked into the room and saw Su Mei at first sight. As long as she was there, it would be difficult not to notice her at first sight. She curled her lips, and when she saw another familiar figure, she immediately became reserved, walked over slowly, and said with a smile, "Hello, Aunt. It's Tang." Tang Yu looked at her and just spoke. Suddenly he saw the bracelet on her wrist. After being stunned, he looked at her with a new look and said enthusiastically, "It's Yao Yao, long time no see, she has become more beautiful." Tang Yao Yao stared blankly at Tang Yu holding her hand, feeling a little uncomfortable. Although Tang Ning's mother was enthusiastic towards her in the past, she was not as enthusiastic as she is now. After she came to her senses, she said with some embarrassment, "Auntie, I'm sorry. Today, Xiru and Xiao I cooked in person." Xiao Xiao was taken out by the old beggar. Fang Xinyu originally came to play with her, but now she became a helper. In addition, Zhao Man insisted on coming over, and the kitchen it was overcrowded. Neither Tang Yaoyao nor Su Mei could help with this kind of thing, so they sat in the pavilion and played flying chess with Tang Ning. The more people lack something, the more they care about it. Tang Ning was used to being alone in her previous life, but now she really enjoys the lively scene of a family. When Su Mei moved the chess pieces, she accidentally exposed the bracelet on her wrist. Tang Yaoyao looked at her, then at Tang Ning, and asked, "Where did you get your bracelet?" Tang Ning explained, "My mother gave it to me." The two bracelets are not a pair, but they are very similar, and the quality of the jade is almost the same. In fact, Xiao Ru Xiaoi, including Tang Shui and Zhao Man, the bracelets on their hands are also similar, as if they are wholesale from the same store. Su Mei looked at the bracelet on Tang Yaoyao's hand and glanced at Tang Ning vaguely, but did not ask any questions. After a game of chess was played, Tang Yaoyao looked at Su Mei and said, "Playing chess is boring. How about we compete and learn from each other?" Su Mei put down the chess piece and said, "Okay." Tang Ning gave her a look, indicating that she should give in to Tang Yaoyao. Tang Yaoyao was good at everything, but she couldn't recognize her own strength. She could only bully her. If Su Mei wanted to deal with her, she didn't have to do anything. Tang Ning originally planned to go to the martial arts training ground to watch them compete. She stood up and suddenly looked at the figure sitting in the corner of the pavilion, staring in a certain direction. She walked slowly over and said softly, "Mom, I have something to do, I want to ask you." Tang Yu came back to her senses, looked at him, smiled and asked, "What's the matter?" Tang Ning thought for a long time before finally making up her mind and said, "I want to ask something about my father." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 444. Remember in 1 second, read wonderful novels for free without pop-up windows. This question has actually been hidden in Tang Ning's mind for a long time, but due to some concerns, he has never asked it. He also has some expectations for the answer to this question. The incredible fate or coincidence has happened to him once, why can't it happen again? Even if there is a slight possibility that the word home can be fulfilled, he will not give up. Tang Yu was stunned for a moment, then looked at him and smiled, "What do you want to ask?" Tang Ning thought about it and said, "My father, what kind of person is he?" Tang Yu was silent for a while, then slowly said, "He is a scholar, like you, he has a bookish air, he knows how to take care of people, and he studies very hard." Listening to her description, Tang Ning already had an image of a scholar in his mind. Although he couldn't see his face clearly, he roughly knew that his father in this world was a weak scholar with a scholar's temperament, studied hard, and treated people gently. Many scholars are like this. He hesitated for a while before asking again, "Is he still alive?" Of course Tang Yu smiled and said, "He said he would come back to find us, and he will definitely come back to find us." Tang Ning thought for a while and asked, "Where is he now?" Tang Yu shook her head, but her expression did not change at all. The expectation and disappointment in her eyes never dimmed. Tang Ning was silent for a moment, and asked tentatively, "Is there a scar the size of a grain of rice on his right arm?" Tang Yu turned her head and looked at him, surprised, "How do you know?" "The stars were bright tonight." Tang Ning walked out of the pavilion alone and looked up at the night sky. He wondered if there was really something called fate above this dome. In the previous life, his father was accidentally injured because he was protecting him, and since then he has left a small scar on his right arm. He didn't quite understand why he came here inexplicably. Was it a joke played by God on him or a gift to him? Bang! He didn't understand this, but he did understand that he shouldn't walk at night. When walking at night, he shouldn't look up, or he might bump into the wall. Tang Yaoyao rubbed her chest and looked at him, saying angrily, "Your eyes are on your forehead." Tang Ning looked forward and realized that he was not bumping into the wall, but Tang Yajing. However, the feeling of the two bumping into each other was not much different. Judging from her current reaction, she should have lost to Sume, and it was a very clean loss. Not bad. Sume walked out from behind her and said, "It's been so long since we last met. You have made great progress. If you keep improving so fast, I won't be your opponent in 2 years." This was a compliment to Tang Yaoyao, but Tang Yajing obviously didn't think so. She looked at her and said, "Let's compete again when we have a chance." Sume didn't refuse and walked to the pavilion by herself. Tang Ning went back to the study first. Tang Yaoyao followed in, straightened her chest, looked at him and asked, "Do you think there is a big gap between me and her?" Tang Ning looked down and felt that the question seemed a little too private, so he couldn't answer it. Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and asked, "Are you listening to me?" Tang Ning came back to his senses, looked down again, nodded and said, "The gap is not small." Tang Yaoyao also looked down, then realized something, and said angrily, "I was talking about martial arts, what are you talking about?" Tang Ning was stunned for a moment, and asked in confusion, "I was talking about martial arts, what are you thinking about?" Tang Yaoyao's chest rose and fell a few times, and she forced herself to calm down. She glared at Tang Ning and said unhappily, "The massage secret you gave me last time is useless." "Did you use it?" "No." Tang Ning didn't dare to expose her obvious self-contradiction, and said, "Perhaps you can ask Qing'er for advice. In terms of martial arts, one Tang Yaoyao can beat 10 Qing'ers, but in some aspects, one Qing'er can beat 10 Tang Yaoyaos." Speaking of Qing'er, Tang Yaoyao's face was filled with shame. She gritted her teeth and whispered, "Doesn't she feel heavy?" "Who would think this is heavy?" Tang Ning hadn't finished his sentence when he received a cold look from Tang Yaoyao. He walked out the door and said, "I'll go see if the meal is ready." It was already late after the dinner, so Tang Ning simply didn't let them go back. Sume occupied Tang Ning's study, Su Ryu and Zhongyi stayed with Tang Yu, and Tang Ning slept alone in the guest room. When he walked into the yard, he saw Tang Yaoyao and Qing'er standing in the corner. Qing'er seemed to be anxious because of Tang Yaoyao's questioning. She said in an innocent voice, "I didn't eat anything, I just grew up casually." The news of the 16 guards competition spread to the market. After a few days of discussion and fermentation, the heat began to rise day by day. The competition, which was originally limited to upper-level officials and dignitaries, was known to everyone in a very short time. This can be seen from the sales of newspapers in Tangrenzai. The daily printing volume of newspapers is more than the previous day, but the speed of selling out is getting faster and faster. Most of them are used as references by gamblers. Although the price of newspapers is low and there is almost no profit, ordinary people are still unwilling to spend a penny to buy these useless things. Tang Ning asked Tang Grenzai to do a market survey yesterday. The content of the survey was the ranking of the strength of the 16 guards in the hearts of the people. As long as you complete this survey, you can get a free newspaper, which attracts the people to participate actively. The survey results show that in the hearts of the people, the left and right Yulin guards and the left and right Jinya guards are still the most powerful among the 16 guards, and they are likely to firmly occupy the top few places in this competition. As for other guards, the support rate is obviously very small. Among the nearly 500 survey forms, more than 450 of them, the ranking of the left Zyoki guard is after the 13th place. In addition, in recent days, there is also a matter related to the 16 guards competition that has been widely circulated in the capital. In previous years, the competition was watched by important officials in the court, or the dignitaries in the capital, or envoys from other countries. The people of the capital were not qualified to watch. This year, the imperial edict was posted on the palace wall early. His Majesty once said fairness and selflessness, one word brings all the people together, so the court decided to invite some people as representatives to witness this grand event together. At that time, farmers, blacksmiths, scholars, and merchants will have the opportunity to participate. The spread of this news immediately made countless people excited. Although they might not be selected, they also felt respected and valued. After knowing that this order was issued by His Majesty, there were more voices in the market praising the Holy Emperor. Tang Ning specially made an interview report on this matter, which occupied half of the newspaper. I believe that after Emperor Chen read it, his vanity will be greatly satisfied. As for himself, he can't always do these empty things. The time for the big competition is getting closer and closer. It is not an easy thing to let the crows of the cavalry guard fly up to the branches and become phoenixes in such a short time. For this reason, he specially let several elite disciples of the beggar gang live in the cavalry camp, just to teach the formations taught by the old beggar to the 100 cavalry guards. On the martial arts field of the cavalry battalion, Xiaoju looked at the 100 people shouting and changing their formations, walked over and said, "How is it?" Tang Ning said, "It looks a bit good." Old Zheng squatted on the ground, glanced at the martial arts field, rubbed his hands unconsciously, and said lightly, "It's just a show. If we really go to the battlefield, with this so-called formation of children playing house, as many as we go, we will die." Tang Ning looked at old Zheng and asked, "What do you mean?" Old Zheng looked at the martial arts field and said calmly, "The battlefield is a life and death struggle. This kind of show can deal with the 12 guards. If the emperor's personal army is also at this level, the head of the general of the Yulin Guard would have been chopped off 10 times. Tang Ning looked at old Zheng in surprise. While talking to him, he rubbed his hands from time to time to express his confusion. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 445. Chapter 443, Old Zheng Takes Action. Tang Ning knew that old Zheng had been in the army before, so he had extraordinary experience. Just like the other 12 guards cannot be compared with the Yulin Guards and the Golden Feather Guards, the Yulin Guards and the Golden Feather Guards cannot be compared with the frontier troops. This is caused by the environment. If the border troops want to survive, they can only fight for their lives. The environment of the Imperial Guards is relatively stable. It is not uncommon for their combat effectiveness to decrease over time. Tang Ning looked at Lao Zheng and asked, "In other words, even if they learn the formation, they may not be able to win." Lao Zheng said disdainfully, "The old beggar is a good fighter. What does he know about fighting?" It was not easy to despise the old beggar, and since he was not here, Tang Ning could understand old Zheng's mood. Lao Zheng stood up, rubbed his hands, and said with a certain light in his eyes, "Give them to me and I will return them to you in a month." Tang Ning was startled when she heard this. Huh. In Tang Ning's heart, Lao Zheng has always been a Buddhist. He doesn't talk much and doesn't do much. If he doesn't talk to him, he can even stay alone for a whole day. He actually offered to train the night riders, which was beyond Tang Ning's expectations. Anyone who doesn't want to be a general's bodyguard is not a good butcher. Lao Zheng has many advantages. The biggest advantage is that he is reliable. Since he took the initiative to make this request, Tang Ning and Xiaoju discussed it and agreed. Xiaoju was a lazy person at heart. He would not do it himself if he could. He was very happy to hand over this job. As for where Chen Zhonglang would go, it was just a matter of his words. Instead of training them in the Zioki camp, Lao Zheng circled a place in the mountains and established a new camp. No one was allowed to visit within a month. He did what he said, and took 100 people into the mountain that day. When he came back, he picked 10 people from the cavalry guard to supplement him, because 10 people in the original team were beaten with military clubs on the first day. Don't even think about getting out of bed without 3 months of rest. Today, Lao Zheng looks a little abnormal. He exudes a strange temperament from the inside out. If you get closer to him, you will feel out of breath. Xiaoju listened to the screams in the camp, looked at Lao Zheng with some fear, and asked Tang Ning, "Can he do it?" Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "Don't worry, he is definitely better than you. I can do it now. Xiaoju glanced at him and said, besides, if I hadn't fallen into an icy lake when I was a child and became seriously ill, I wouldn't have. Xiaoju's self-esteem is still very strong. Tang Ning didn't actually mean it just now, he just thought of something on his own. When the two of them returned to the city from the Zioki camp, Xiaoju suddenly thought of something, looked at him and asked, "You are good at martial arts, can you teach me some unique moves? If I meet Lu Ya next time, maybe I can win back a little face." Tang Ning knows a lot of tricks, but the so-called tricks must first be based on strength. A 3-year-old child can't hurt an adult with a kitchen knife. Tang Ning saw Lu Ya once and actually used her hands. He himself was not even sure he could beat her. With Xiaoju's 3-legged cat skills, the chance of turning around in this life was very small. However, he did not hit Xiaoju and said casually, "Okay, I will teach you when I have time." Just tomorrow. Xiaoju couldn't wait and said, "Tomorrow you will be released from office, and I will look for you." When Tang Ning returned home, she found many cars and sedans parked in front of Tang Yaoyao's house. Ever since businessmen in the capital knew that the 16th Guards competition was funded and organized by the Tang family, the number of people visiting the Tang family had increased dramatically every day. Businessmen value profits but also seek fame. They have already earned enough money, and what they need more is fame. The Tang family is not prominent in the capital, and has only gradually risen in the past 2 years. It is not taken seriously by the wealthy businessmen in the capital. But who would have thought that in this 16th Guards competition, the Tang family would actually use this method, appear in everyone's eyes. Whether it is among the people or the court, businessmen are not taken seriously. Not just anyone can get this kind of opportunity to show their face. What's more, they have already heard that the court will select many people to watch the competition, including businessmen. They also need to fight for such opportunities here in the Tang family. Taking a step back, even if you can't get an invitation, there is no harm in establishing a good relationship with the Tang family. After this incident, who doesn't know that the Tang family has a powerful background in the capital? After all, Tang Ning was just the boss behind Tang Renzai. On the surface, rich man Tang was responsible for this matter, while Tang Yaoyao represented the Tang Renzai. He stood at the door and thought for a while, but decided to go in and take a look. The Tang family has a large business and has properties in many prefectures. However, rich man Tang was rooted in Lingzhou before and did not develop in the more prosperous capital. Tang Ning always felt that he seemed to have some resistance to the capital. This resulted in the Tang family having no foundation in the capital. Although its focus had shifted in the past 2 years, it was not very competitive compared with other merchants in the capital. The reason why he did not recruit sponsors this time was to promote the Tang family's reputation first. When they have a firm foundation in the capital, they will naturally not let go of so many advertisers and sponsors. Even if rich man Tang doesn't want to see him, he still wants to take him with him if he has any good deeds. After all, he is Tang Yejing's father. If it were anyone else, let alone eating meat with him, he wouldn't even be able to drink a mouthful of soup. Tang Mansion. The living room was full of people. These wealthy businessmen who had not taken the Tang family seriously before and had been operating in the capital for more than 10 years were extremely polite to the Tang rich. "Manager Tang, I have heard a lot about you. I have been thinking about visiting Manager Tang for a long time, but unfortunately I have not had the chance until today. This is the daughter of the Tang family, she is indeed a lady from a noble family with extraordinary temperament." Everyone surrounded the wealthy Tang, praising him endlessly. Tang Yaoyao beside him was praised as a lady from a noble family who is rare in the world and hard to find in heaven. After some politeness, someone finally looked at the wealthy Tang and asked with a smile, "I heard that this 16 Guards competition was organized by the Tang family. Manager Tang is really powerful. Maybe we will have to rely on you to take care of us in the future." Tang Ji waved his hand and said, It all depends on luck. Tang Ning walked to the door and heard what the wealthy Tang said. He paused and couldn't help but glance at him. His greatest luck is that he has a good daughter and his good daughter has a reliable friend. In the hall, someone walked up to Tang Ji and asked tentatively, I heard that ordinary people can also watch the competition as long as they buy tickets. Is it true? Yes, Tang Ji nodded and said, tickets will be available for sale in a few days. If you are interested, just pay more attention to it. Everyone was shocked when they heard this. This sentence means that the tickets for the 16 guards competition are also sold by the Tang family. This kind of occasion only happens once every few years. There are countless people in Beijing who want to go but are not qualified. It is conceivable that once this kind of ticket is sold, there will be many people scrambling for it. What they bought is not only a ticket, but also a special honor. At that time, the powerful officials in Beijing will gather, and there will be envoys from other countries, and even His Majesty will appear. As merchants who are not welcomed, how many opportunities do they have in their lives to appear in such an occasion? For a moment, everyone looked at the rich man Tang and immediately became hot. Tang Ning walked in from outside the door, walked to Tang Yao Yao, gave her a look, and signaled her to go out and talk. The tickets for the competition are sold by Tang Gren. This Tang Gren is not the Tang family. Mr. Tang is cunning and cunning. If you are not careful, he will take advantage of you. You must warn Tang Yejing. Someone in the venue noticed Tang Ning, looked at Mr. Tang, and said with a smile, could this be Mr. Tang? He is really handsome and looks like a dragon and phoenix among men. Tang Ji said expressionlessly, no. The man was stunned for a moment, and immediately changed his words, then he must be the son-in-law. Oh, the son-in-law and the young lady are really a perfect match. It's simply a match made in heaven, a golden boy and a jade girl. Bang. Tang Ji put the teacup heavily on the table, glanced at him, and said, send him out. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 446. Chapter 444 of the main text of the Ruyi young man, 2 pieces of wood sent guests off after a disagreement. Tang Ning vaguely felt that rich man Tang's temper was a bit louder than before. But this is normal. In today's business circle in the capital, no one does not envy him. After all, there are many things in this world that cannot be bought with money. Because of the 16th Guards competition, too many businessmen showed goodwill to the Tang family. Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao walked out of the living room, then looked at her and said, don't listen to that guy's nonsense just now, about a talented man and a beautiful girl, a golden boy and a beautiful girl, a perfect match. It's all nonsense. Tang Yao Yao frowned and stared at him, asking, you mean, I'm not worthy of you? No, Tang Ning was startled, then immediately shook her head and said, you are gentle, kind, considerate, beautiful, and smart, and have a comfortable home, of course an outstanding woman like you is worthy of me. Tang Ning realized the flaw in what he just said, and was inevitably questioned by Tang Yejing. She finally ignored the question without her conscience. Bah, who wants to match you? Fairy Tang still spat at him, shook her head and left. Xiu'er stood in the yard, watching this scene, and sighed leisurely. Tang Ning also sighed and asked, do you also think your lady is weird? Xiu'er glanced at him and said, she's not the only strange person. With Tang Yao Yao keeping an eye on matters in the business world, Tang Ning could rest assured that he only needed to do what the Ministry of War should do well. Lu Shangshu is very satisfied with his current actions. Preparing for the 16th Guards competition was originally a thankless task. It was exhausting and he had to be criticized and complained by the 16th Guards. Now it's different. The Ministry of War has no financial pressure and can still get money from the competition. It means that the 16th Guards have worked hard to make money for them. Bad things have turned into good things. The enthusiasm of the entire Ministry of War has been mobilized. When he was approaching the Yamen, Xiaoju came to the Ministry of War to look for him. 100 men of Zhou Xiao's cavalry were taken to the mountains by Lao Zheng to practice in seclusion for a month, but Xiaoju, the captain, was free. After leaving the Yamen, the two of them left the Ministry of War together. Xiaoju looked at Lu Ding, who came out, raised his hand and said, "Good morning, Lu Shangzhu." Lu Ding just glanced at him but didn't respond and walked away minding his own business. Tang Ning looked at Xiaoju and asked, "Have you ever offended him?" "He and I haven't even spoken a few words." Xiaoju also looked depressed and said, "It was his daughter who bullied me. Why is he putting on such a stinky air?" Lu Ding, Minister of the Ministry of War, is a man. There is no such thing as menopause, which can make a middle-aged man dislike seeing someone for no reason. Tang Ning understands this very well. Tang Ning looked at him and said in a person's tone, "He may think that you have some evil thoughts about his daughter." "Me, to Lu Ya," Xiaoju said as if he had heard a big joke, "I can't even get a wife in the capital, and it's not just because of her. I'm also worried that she has some evil thoughts about me." Woolen cloth. He looked at Tang Ning and said seriously, "You can teach me a few more moves later. Lu Ya and I have made an appointment to have a duel outside the city tomorrow. It's up to you whether you can save face." Tang Ning asked, "Don't you never hit women?" Xiaoju snorted coldly and said, "Is she considered a woman?" Tang Ning thought for a moment and then asked, "Do you think you can defeat her tomorrow by learning 2 moves today?" Xiaoju said firmly and confidently, "I think she is only a little better than me. I still have a chance." You can never wake up a person who is pretending to be asleep, nor can you wake up a person who is mentally weak. Lu Ya was born in a general and practiced martial arts since she was a child. Even Tang Ning did not dare to say what he just said. Xiaoju needs to suffer enough. Only by taking a blow can you fully understand your own strength. Lu Mansion. Before Lu Ding could walk into the house, he saw a figure coming out of the house. He looked at Lu Ya and asked, "Where to go?" Lu Ya said, "Go out for a walk." Lu Ding frowned and said, "Going to Xiao's house again?" Lu Ya said, "I have nothing to do. I'm going to talk to Mr. Xiao. There aren't many people in the Xiao family who can talk to him." Lu Ding looked at her and asked, "I don't understand what's so good about Xiaoju. Why do you just?" "He's good at everything," Lu Ya said without thinking, then paused and said, "He's just a bit stupid." Lu Ding frowned even more and said, "He is not a real man." "That's also because of me." Lu Ya took a deep breath and said, "I owe him this. I'm leaving." Seeing his daughter striding away, an angry look appeared on Lu Ding's face, and then he became helpless, shook his head, and walked into the house. Lu Teng, who had just returned home, stood in the courtyard, raised his head and said, "Dad." "What, Dad?" Lu Ding glanced at him and said angrily, "Look at Xiaoju, he is already a captain at a young age. Look at you, it took you 3 years to become a captain, and you are all generals. Come out, why is the gap so big?" After receiving a scolding for no apparent reason, Lu Teng stood there blankly with an innocent expression. Xiaoju's captaincy was obtained through his own imperial examination. Being promoted to the rank of captain so quickly was also a special gift from His Majesty to the Xiao family, which he could not compare with. What was a bit difficult for him to accept was that Xiaoju, young Master Xiao, had always been regarded as a negative example in the past. Somehow in the past 2 years, he suddenly became a being that even the generals and disciples in the capital could not compare to him when they raised their heads. What's more, other people's children are often used as comparisons. In the Tang mansion, in the study, Tang Ning put down her pen, looked at Xiaoju, and asked, "Did you win?" Almost Xiaoju shook his head, but he was not too frustrated and said, "I almost beat her today. If I practice for a few more days, I will definitely win. I made an appointment with her to meet again in 3 days. Compare. The gap between Xiaoju and Lu Ya is not even small, it is even wider than the gap between Tang Ning and Tang Yaoyao. Tang Ning was puzzled. How did he come to the conclusion that he could almost defeat Lu Yat? He thought for a while, and when he looked at Xiaoju, he became a little intriguing. Fortunately, we made an agreement in advance, not to slap people in the face. Xiaoju rubbed his face and said, "Would you like to teach me a few more special moves?" There was no way he could win anyway, so Tang Ning just taught him casually. As the saying goes, stupid people have stupid blessings. As the saying goes, you don't know blessings when you are in blessings. Xiaoju actually got them all. With Lao Zhen training the cavalry guards, Xiaoju had some free time. When he had nothing to do, he came to Tang Ning to learn the secret skills, and then risked his dignity as a man to challenge Lu Yat. Although each time ended in failure, Xiaoju, who had inflated his self-confidence, felt that he was just a little behind, and he actually started to practice hard. The competition with Lu Yat also changed from once every 3 days to take it 1 day at a time. Because he thought it would be troublesome to go outside the city every time, he directly chose the place at Tang Ning's house. The martial arts training ground in the backyard of the Tang mansion was big enough for them to do a lot of work. Xiaoju and Lu Ya were struggling in the martial arts training ground, while Tang Ning and Tang Yaoyao were sitting on the wall, watching with boredom. Lu Ya's sexual behavior couldn't be more obvious, and even a little too obvious, but Xiaoju couldn't see it. Lu Ya kicked her on her butt, rolled around on the grass twice, patted her butt and got up, saying, "I was careless just now. I was just a little bit close. Come back tomorrow." Lu Ya clapped her hands, glanced at him, and asked, "Who did you learn your new moves from? Can you teach me?" "How can this work?" Xiaoju refused without thinking, and said firmly, "I will teach you these tricks and let you defeat me. Am I that stupid?" Lu Ya looked at him and said, "You teach me, and I'll treat you to a meal. You can order any of Tianju's famous dishes, how about that?" Xiaoju shook his head and said, "I'm tired of the food there, so I won't go." Tang Ning sat on the wall, shook her head and said, "Rotten wood cannot be carved." Tang Yaoyao sat side by side with him, agreed with his words, nodded and said, "What a piece of wood." Xiu stood in the yard, looked at the 2 figures on the wall, and sighed, "2 pieces of wood." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 447. Chapter 445, Pre-match marketing. Xiaoju was worried that Lu Ya would learn his tricks and turn against him, so he rejected Lu Ya's request and her invitation to a natural residence. After Lu Ya left, he looked up at Tang Ning and asked, "How was it?" Tang Ning jumped down from the wall and asked, "What about it?" "The competition just now." Xiaoju clapped his hands and said, "If I hadn't been careless just now, I might have won back a victory." Tang Ning cupped her hand and said, "Keep working hard, you will beat her one day." Xiaoju said without any doubt, "Of course." As an outsider, you can often see this kind of thing more clearly. Since even Xiaoju himself didn't realize that he was being picked up, Tang Ning didn't remind him. Growth always requires a process, and some things require him to take his own time. Enlightenment. The old beggar brought Xiao Xiao back. He would sometimes take Xiao Xiao out for as little as 3 to 5 days, or as long as 10 days and a half. During the time Tang Ning went to Chu State, the longest time he took Xiao Xiao out was for training. For a month. He truly regarded Xiao Xiao as his personal disciple. On weekdays, he looked at him as a fool and unreliable, but he was extra serious when teaching Xiao Xiao. In his own words, he didn't want his superb kung fu to be passed down when he died, but he also didn't want to pass it on to those mediocre people and ruin his reputation. A small appearance gave him hope. The old beggar's goal is to teach Xiao Xiao everything he has learned throughout his life before he dies. When Xiao Xiao grows up, he will find a suitable disciple to pass on to him. Their sect has always been passed down by a single line. The old beggar taught seriously, and so did the elementary school students. The misfortune of her childhood and the ups and downs of her life experience have made her more mature than any of her peers, and she is more eager than anyone to have the power to protect herself. Apart from practicing and studying, she often sits alone in the pavilion in a daze. Tang Ning walked out of the kitchen, brought a small bowl to her and said, "Try it." This is a new dish he has learned in the past 2 days. It was the last time he saw Xiao Tao cooking it for Su Mei in Tianashanju. He thought it tasted good and specially learned it from Xiao Tao. Xiao Xiao took the bowl from his hand and said in surprise, "Tofu dumplings." Tang Ning looked at her in surprise and asked, "Have you eaten before?" He and Xiao I had studied many recipes, but they had never seen tofu made this way. According to Su Mei, this was a snack from her hometown, and she didn't expect Xiao Xiao to know about it. Xiao Xiao nodded and said, "My grandma often cooked it for me when I was a child. Later, I lost my way with my grandma and I never had it again." After she finished speaking, she eagerly scooped up a ball, took a bite, and fed another one to Tang Ning. She said, "It tastes the same as the one made by grandma. Brother, try it. It's delicious." She finished the bowl quickly. Tang Ning took the bowl from her hand and said, "Eat more if you like, and I'll serve you another bowl." She seems to be naturally thin. After more than a year of nursing, she still hasn't gained weight. Tang Ning doesn't need her to be strong, as long as she is as fleshy as Ching-er. He walked to the kitchen door and saw Lao Zheng squatting on the porch with a bowl filled with tofu dumplings he had made. Lao Zheng gave a rare compliment, "This dumpling tastes good, I haven't had it for a long time." Tang Ning asked in confusion, "Have you eaten it before?" "I used to eat it a lot when I was in the army, but now I haven't eaten it for more than 10 years." Old Zheng ate all the meatballs in the bowl in 3 mouthfuls. When he stood up, Tang Ning looked at the pot and said immediately, "If you want to eat it, I'll make it for you next time. The rest will be for snacks." Hearing this, Lao Zheng put down the bowl and said, "Tell Xiao Ju tomorrow and ask him to send me 2 more people. I don't know how the butcher trains. It takes 2 days to defeat one of them. Those who go back after that are all veterans who have retired from the border army. They have been on the battlefield for many years and can barely withstand the destruction of old Zheng. In less than half a month, the 16th Guardian competition will officially begin. During this period of time, Tang Ning has done everything she should do. The next step is up to Lao Zheng. This competition is different from the past, not only in the different rules. After the group stage, when only 8 guards were eliminated from the 16 guards, every game was held in the newly built arena of Zioki Camp. For safety reasons, the stadium cannot be built very large, but it can still accommodate nearly 3,000 people. Excluding the officials and dignitaries who will attend the ceremony for free, envoys from other countries, and invited people from all walks of life, there are still nearly 2,600 seats sold as tickets. There is no shortage of rich people or dignitaries in the capital. Those small businessmen and dignitaries who are not qualified to participate and have not been invited are scrambling to reserve their seats before the tickets are officially sold, for fear that others will snatch the front row. After such a long period of publicity and warm-up, this year's 16th Guards competition has already set off a wave of excitement in the capital, and there is no need to worry about not selling out the tickets. The organizers of the competition also announced early that a lucky spectator will be selected on the final day of the competition. This lucky viewer will receive a set of Li Qing's complete works published by Tang Grenzai, a set of Tang Ningning's complete works, 10 jars of fine wines from Tang Grenfang, 10 pieces of silk and satin from Tang's Satin House, a VIP card of Hungzhou Pavilion, and enjoy Tang's lifelong enjoyment. The hotel offers half-price accommodation, and you will also receive a voucher worth 500 taels from Tang's restaurant. Their actions were not ungenerous. There were nearly 100 rewards in total, covering almost all the industries of the Tang family and Tang people in Kyoto. When these rewards were added together, even wealthy businessmen with substantial wealth would be tempted. What's more, for the people in Beijing, if someone is lucky enough to win, they will really reach the pinnacle of life, and they will have no worries about food and clothing for the rest of their lives. Although they can't afford a seat in the front, they can afford a remote seat in the back. If such a good thing can happen to them, what does the ticket money spent mean? Although the possibility of being selected from 3,000 people is very small, but, what if? The long gift list was posted on the palace wall. Someone added up the value of these gifts one by one. It was initially estimated to be more than 10,000 taels. There were more than 100 kinds of goods involved. In the past few days, almost all the people in the city have been discussing this matter. Many people have even burned incense and worshipped Buddha many times, in order to pray for the blessings of Buddha and Bodhisattva, so that this good luck can come to them, which indirectly makes majors near the capital. The temple has an endless stream of pilgrims, and the amount of incense money received is second only to the temple fair at the beginning of each year. Tang's and Tang Ren's stores place lottery prizes in conspicuous places. The number of customers has doubled in the past few days. Most people just come to watch the excitement. When they see a series of discounts in the store, they can't help but stop. What Tang Yaoyao held in her hand was the performance report of major stores in Beijing these past few days. The figures on it were several times higher than usual. Calculated, the extra profits in the past few days were already greater than what they had given out as prizes of goods. And this is not the end yet. There is still more than a month before the competition begins. It is conceivable that the investment they have made in preparing for the competition will come back tenfold. She can also think that once these shops come into the eyes of the people and become accustomed to them, they will bring greater gains in the future. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "How about it? I didn't lie to you, did I?" Tang Yaoyao looked at Tang Ning and felt a little admiration for him, but she quickly shook her head and pretended to be calm. "What's so great about this? I almost thought of it." Tang Ning glanced at her. She might have forgotten that when he proposed to draw a koi carp as a gift for the audience as a pre-game marketing, she objected for a while. However, he won't be stupid enough to expose her. Even if he is being reasonable, it is best not to offend the woman, otherwise you don't know when they will come back with revenge. Xiaoju and Lu Ya came over on time. While warming up, Xiaoju looked at Tang Ning and said, "I went to the Red Sleeve Pavilion with Lu Jun and others last night to listen to music, and saw a woman who was my type. I don't know who she was." "Which daughter? You are familiar with the shopkeeper of Hongzhou Pavilion, can you help me find out if you have time?" After the warm-up, he squeezed the joints of his hands until they crackled, looked at Lu Ya, and said, "I learned a few more tricks yesterday. Be careful. If you lose, don't blame me for not reminding you." Lu Ya looked at him calmly and asked, "Which daughter did you meet yesterday?" "I haven't found out yet." Xiaoju walked up to her and said, "Stop talking nonsense, come on." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 448. Ruyi Xiaolang Jun Text Volume 446 Training Effect. How could this happen? Xiaoju lay weakly on the grass, looking at the sky, tears falling from the corners of his eyes. He and Lu Ya agreed not to hit people in the face, so his whole body, except for the face and a certain part, was ravaged by Lu Ya. The physical destruction was only part of it. What made him even more desperate was that he thought he could be on par with Lu Ya, but the fact was that Lu Ya unilaterally ravaged him and then left, leaving him lying here alone and doubting his life. Tang Ning originally wanted to have someone send Xiaoju back. When he sent him out the door, he found Lu Ya standing there waiting. Lu Ya naturally helped the limping Xiaoju up and said, "I'll take him back. Women are really devils." Just now, she had used a whole set of Lu family boxing on Xiaoju, but now she can be as gentle as a young wife. Tang Ning felt a little chilled when he thought about it. Xiaoju's face was pale. He looked back at Tang Ning, shook his head vigorously, and trembled. Tang Ning did not dare to look into Xiaoju's eyes, and nodded, "Then I'll trouble Miss Lu." He turned away regardless of Xiaoju's desperate eyes. Xiaoju would know in the future that everything he did today was for his own good. Xiaoju was desperate, but he did not forget to turn back and said, "Don't forget to help me find that girl." Why are you pinching me?" Tang Yaoyao stood at the door, watching the two of them cuddling away, and said, "They are quite a match. When a man chases a woman, there is a mountain between them, and when a woman chases a man, there is a layer of gauze between them. Lu Ya is obviously a strange woman who will not give up until she achieves her goal, otherwise Xiaoju would not have been beaten since he was a child." In Tang Ning's humble opinion, Xiao Xiaogongyi should not be able to escape from her palm. Tang Yaoyao looked at him and suddenly asked, "Miss Lu bullies him all day long, doesn't he hate her?" "Who knows?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "There are always some people in this world who like to be bullied, and they are happy and painful. Maybe Xiaoju is one of them. You know you can't beat them, but you will take the initiative to find Sumei, Tang Shui, and Li Tianlan to spar." Tang Yaoyao raised an eyebrow and looked at him, asking, "What did you say?" Tang Ning realized that he had just given an inappropriate example, and changed his words, "I mean, maybe Xiaoju likes Lu Ya to bully him. You know, there are all kinds of people in this world." Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and asked, "What about you?" "I." Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "We are different. You are much gentler than Lu Ya." The most excessive thing Tang Yaoyao did was to ride on him. She would not hit him in the face, nor would she hit him so hard. After watching Lu Ya and Xiaoju compete, Tang Ning realized that Tang Yaoyao was actually a gentle woman. If he was beaten like Xiaoju every day, he would not like the person who beat him. Perhaps because of his praise for Tang Yajing, she did not care about Tang Ning's unintentional exposure of her, and seemed quite happy. It seems that even a violent woman wants others to praise her for her gentleness, even if it is against her conscience. After being beaten up by Lu Ya last time and lying in bed for 2 days, Xiaoju has never challenged Lu Ya again. It is said that in order to express her apology, Lu Ya stayed by his bedside to take care of him, served tea and water, made the bed and folded the quilt. This may be the reason why Xiaoju has not complained about her these days. It is now the beginning of December, and tomorrow is the day when the 16 guards competition officially begins. The first to start is the internal round-robin competition of each group. The round-robin competition is not open to the public, and only the results are announced. The performance of each team will serve as a reference for betting in subsequent competitions. The 100 men of the left cavalry guard were still training in the mountains and had not returned. Old Zheng went into the mountains during the day and came back at night, and he did not allow anyone to visit them, so even Tang Ning did not know what those people were like now. He and Xiaoju were waiting outside the barracks of the cavalry camp, looking at the official road ahead. There was still no movement ahead. Xiaoju looked at Tang Ning and asked, "The competition will start tomorrow, he won't forget it, right?" When old Zheng left in the morning, he said that he would let those people come back today. Tang Ning waved his hand and said, "Wait a little longer." Xiaoju was absent-minded, and at one point he looked at Tang Ning, hesitated for a moment, and then asked, "Do you think Lu Ya is a little bit wrong?" Tang Ning looked at Xiaoju in surprise. He actually saw it. He looked at Xiaoju and asked, "What's wrong?" Xiaoju looked suspicious and said, "Last time I was injured and at home, she took care of me for 2 days at my house and even fed me medicine. Do you think she is?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "You finally figured it out." Did she remember that I saved her when she was a child and now she wants to repay me? Xiaoju shook his head and said in surprise, I didn't expect that she still remembered that incident. I thought she had forgotten it. Tang Ning looked at him and didn't know what to say for a moment. But, her wishful thinking is too good. Xiaoju changed the subject and said, she was the one who injured me and took care of me. Can this be considered a repayment? Tang Ning looked at him and asked, what counts as a repayment? Ask her to marry me. That's not necessary. Xiaoju shook his head and said, if she can introduce me to a few of the sisters she knows, I can consider forgiving her. You're right. Tang Ning nodded and said, when your injury is healed, you can ask her next time you see her. Xiaoju's face showed interest, and he murmured, why didn't I think of it before? She knows many women from military families. Tang Ning imagined the next meeting between Xiaoju and Lu Ya, and looked forward casually, and saw dozens of figures walking out of the forest. These people were ragged, and although they were wrapped up thickly, everyone was covered in dust, looking more miserable than the beggars in the capital. From the number of people and clothes, these people are indeed the 100 cavalry guards. Although they were dressed in rags and slovenly, they gave people an extraordinary feeling. From a distance, you can feel a captivating momentum coming towards you. Tang Ning was fine, but when Xiaoju looked up for the first time, he couldn't help but take 2 steps back. In less than a month, the momentum of these 100 people has changed dramatically from before. Tang Ning had seen the Yulin Guards and many armies of the Chu state, but he had never seen such momentum in any team. Lao Zheng came over, clapped his hands, and said, time is limited, so we can only practice like this, so let's make do with it. Xiaoju walked forward again, looked at them, and then looked at Tang Ning and said, the Zozioki guards will go on stage tomorrow. Otherwise, I will find 100 people from the army and let them practice first. No need. Tang Ning thought about it, looked behind him, and said, let them compete with my guards. The elite disciples of the beggars sect are 20 against 100. If these Zioki guards can beat them, they will have no problem dealing with the 16 guards competition. Lao Zheng looked behind and said, find 20 people and compete with them. I get the order. A captain stood up and said, first team, second team, step out. 20 people against 20 people, if they can beat the beggars sect disciples who are skilled in formation, then they can almost sweep the other teams of the 16 guards. The 20 cavalry guards were also divided into 2 teams, 10 in each, with different weapons. Even with just 10 people, there were many changes that Tang Ning couldn't understand. A month ago, the beggars sect had fought with them. With the same number of people, they almost swept them. A month later, when they met again, they were in a stalemate from the beginning. Although the formations taught by the old beggar were varied, the opponent's attacks were swift and coordinated, leaving them no chance to change the formation quickly. Not long after the start, 5 beggars sect disciples were eliminated, while the opponent only eliminated 1 person. It is not difficult to see that after nearly a month of special training by Lao Zheng, the beggars sect disciples are no match for them. Xiaoju's eyes lit up and said, only 20 people are so powerful. If there are 100 people, wouldn't they be able to eliminate the Zhou Yue in the first game tomorrow? The first game eliminated the Yulin Guards and was eliminated as the first in Group A. The Cavalry Guards are naturally the biggest dark horse in this competition, but what about then? Everyone knows that the Cavalry Guards are powerful, and everyone wants to bet on this dark horse who debuted in the center position. What's the point of Lao Zheng training them? What's the point of them spending money to hold the 16 guards competition? He doesn't know how to hide his weaknesses, and he thinks others don't hide their weaknesses. Tang Ning looked at Xiaoju. This is why he is always beaten by Lu Ya. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 449. Why? Xiaoju looked at Tang Ning with a look of surprise on his face and asked, I have also been in the Yulin Guards. The Yulin guards are definitely not that powerful. Why did we lose the first game on purpose? Tang Ning looked at him and asked, do you understand showing weakness to the enemy? It's not necessary. Xiaoju shook his head and said, even the Yulin guards are no match for them. They can completely crush them all the way. Now is the chance for the night riding guards to stand up. Competition is just a way, making money is the purpose. Xiaoju obviously didn't realize this. Tang Ning looked at him and said, anyway, this is a ploy, so don't worry about it. If you still have something to talk to Lu Ya about, go ahead. Xiaoju thought for a while, nodded and said, okay, then I'll come find you in the afternoon. Originally, she and Xiaoju made an appointment to discuss tactics in the afternoon, but Xiaoju never came back, and Tang Ning didn't see him until the next morning. Too much, he limped out of the camp and gritted his teeth, this crazy woman, I just asked her if she knew any good sisters from the generals. A woman's heart is like a needle in the ocean. Tang Ning patted his shoulder and comforted him, don't worry about Lu Ya, the Night Rider will be on stage soon. Zioki Camp is the venue for this 16 guards competition. In the next nearly half a month, 16 teams will compete here for victory. The first thing to do is the group stage. The 16 guards are divided into 4 groups according to the rankings of previous years. The 4-to-2 group round-robin competition requires 6 games, 4 games per day, and 6 days. Zhou Wei is the first match today. Their opponent is Zhou Yulin Wei, one of the favorite teams to win the 16th guard competition. The Ministry of War has already announced that the first place team in this competition will each receive a reward of 100 taels of silver, and the leader will receive a prize of 1,000 taels. This is for these people, most of whom are from the poor. For people in the family, it is undoubtedly a huge sum of money, and the enthusiasm for participating in the competition team is far greater than in previous years. Zhou Wei's people haven't arrived yet, but there are already many people in the venue. Ticket sales for the group stage are not open to the public, but it does not prevent people from the 16th guards from coming to watch, including some dignitaries in Beijing and the general's disciples, who can also watch from the sidelines. Zhou Wei is led by Lu Tang. Logically speaking, a captain is not enough to represent Zhou Wei in battle. However, the status of the Lu family is not low. The children of the family are all promoted in the army, and there is no shortage of appearances. Chances are, once you have enough qualifications, you can easily move up to the next level. Xiaoju stood next to Tang Ning and finally couldn't help but ask, is it true that we can't win today? Tang Ning knew that he didn't want to lose to Lu Tang, so she looked at him and asked, do you want money or a moment of face? Xiaoju thought about it and felt that money was more important, mainly because he no longer had much face in the capital. He was silent for a while and couldn't help but said, do you think I owed them the Lu family in my previous life? How come they are always against me? Thinking of him being ravaged by Lu Ya all day long, and looking at his current state, even Tang Ning couldn't bear it. She shook her head and said, actually, it's not like we can't win today. Xiaoju said happily, do you have any idea? Tang Ning approached him and whispered a few words, and Xiaoju's eyes gleamed. As a friend, Tang Ning sympathized with Xiaoju's miserable experience and couldn't help but ask, have you ever thought about why Lu Ya always likes to beat you up? As long as you mention other girls in front of her, she will beat you up more ruthless. Xiaoju said with resentment, because she is sick. Tang Ning said, we might as well make a bold assumption. Xiaoju said, what are you assuming? Tang Ning continued, suppose she beat you just to get your attention, suppose she was jealous of those girls and was rude to you, wouldn't it be easier to understand? Xiaoju thought for a while and said, then she is still sick. Tang Ning followed the temptation and said, if we assume that she likes you, wouldn't everything be explained? Xiaoju was silent for a long time, looked at him, and said, your assumption is too bold. As a friend, Tang Ning felt that he had already exhausted his kindness and righteousness. Such a blatant hint, no, such a blatant explicit statement that if he didn't understand, it would be understandable that the incense of the old Xiao family would be cut off from him. He glanced at Xiaoju one last time, waved his hand, and said, "There are still things to do at the Ministry of War, so I'll leave first." Xiaoju stood there with a stunned expression, as if he was thinking about something. After a moment, he shook his head violently and murmured, "Impossible, this must be impossible." The venue for the competition was at the Zioki camp, and the people responsible for the management and refereeing were the Ministry of War. Tang Ning walked over and did her usual inspection, and said hello to everyone in the Ministry of War. Not long after, Zhou Wei's people arrived. Master Tang Luteng came over half an hour before the competition started and took the initiative to say hello to him. Sir, following Luteng was Chen Zhou. This time he came back and was promoted. He was in charge of dozens of people and was now Luteng's deputy. Xiaoju walked over, glanced at Luteng, and asked, "What are you doing here? Do you want to bribe the military referee?" Xiaoju was naturally hostile to people named Lu. Luteng glanced at him, looked behind him and said, "Sister. You still want to scare me with Lu Ya?" Xiaoju sneered and said, "Don't say she's not here, even if she is really here, I." Lu Ya came over from behind Xiaoju and asked, "How are you?" "I'll find you a good seat." Xiaoju pointed to a stand in the front and said, "The view there is the best. I'll have someone reserve it for you. In the finals, that's a seat that only princes are qualified to sit in." After a long period of torture, there is no doubt that Xiaoju has evolved a perfect desire to survive. The seat he took Lu Ya to is the best one except for the emperor's seat. A real man should be able to bend and stretch, and this sentence is well interpreted by Xiaoju. As a man, I won't argue with her. Xiaoju glanced at the front and said, "Since she is here, let her see how I beat Zhou Wei." "Haha, beat Zhou Wei, when did the cavalry guard become so powerful?" Several figures came from the back, and the one in the front looked at Xiaoju and laughed. "How to win, relying on your mouth, Xiaoju." Xiaoju frowned and asked, "Ling Feng, you have nothing to do here." The young man smiled, "Haha, Captain Xiao is so powerful. What else can the cavalry guard rely on to beat Zhou Wei?" Xiaoju looked at him calmly and said, "Say one more word." The young man folded his arms, "If I say one more word, what can you do to me?" "You, come here." Xiaoju waved his hand, and immediately a team of guards came trotting over, stopped and said, "Captain Xiao." Xiaoju looked at the young man and said, "Go ahead." The young man named Ling Feng looked at the team of guards, then looked at Xiaoju, then he remembered that this was the cavalry battalion, Xiaoju's territory. He slowly lowered his hands from his chest and whispered, "What a joke, you asked me to say it, I won't say it." He looked back and said, "Let's go." Tang Ning looked at Xiaoju and asked, "Do you have a grudge against him?" "No." Xiaoju shook his head and said, "He is Ling Yun's younger brother. The people of the Ling family have never been on good terms with us." Tang Ning knew something about the generals in Beijing. The Xiao family, the Lu family, the Huang family, and the Mu family were all declining nobles. Xiaoju, Lu Jun, and Mu Yu belonged to one circle, while the prosperous families like the Ling family and the Lu family belonged to another. The actual situation of the circle was even more complicated, but the friction and conflict between circles had always existed, so that every meeting was not harmonious. In front, someone behind the young man who had just confronted Xiaoju said, "Master Ling, you don't have to be angry with Xiaoju." "What a joke, would I be angry with him?" Ling Feng sneered, with a sarcastic look on his face, and said, "What Xiao, he is just relying on the favor of his majesty. He is not even a man, it is better to be cut off and enter the palace, ouch." As Ling Feng was talking, his feet suddenly tripped, his body leaned forward, and he fell hard to the ground. "Who is blind?" He got up from the ground in a mess, looking at the figure beside him, and was about to scold, but stopped abruptly. Lu Ya stood up from her seat, her face as cold as frost, pinching her hands and creaking her joints, and said coldly, "You stepped on my foot, and you dare to scold me." Ling Feng's face showed a trace of fear, and he argued, "I didn't step on it, I was far away from you." Lu Ya approached step by step, her voice became colder, "You dare to quibble. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 450. Remember it in 1 second and read wonderful novels for free without pop-ups. Tang Ning was discussing tactics with Xiao Ju for a while when she suddenly heard screams not far away. They both turned their heads at the same time and saw Lu Ya beating the young man named Ling Feng. The people behind the young man retreated and no one dared to stop him. Xiao Ju was stunned for a moment, then strode over and said, "What are you doing? This is the Zioki camp, don't make trouble." He kicked the young man who was already lying on the ground several times, stood aside and looked at Lu Ya, and said, "Stop it quickly." Lu Ya said, "He stepped on my shoe." Xiao Ju nodded and said, "Then we really should fight." "Stop," a shout suddenly came from beside Lu Ya, and the next moment, Lu Ya's wrist was held by someone. Xiao Ju took a step forward, opened Ling Yun's hand, stood in front of Lu Ya, and said, "What are you doing?" Lu Ya looked up at his back with a slightly startled expression. Ling Yun helped Ling Feng, who was already bruised and swollen, up, looked at Lu Ya, and asked, "I wonder if he has offended Miss Lu in any way." Xiao Ju looked at him and said, "This is not your Yulin guard. You stepped on someone's foot and didn't even apologize." Ling Yun looked at Lu Ya and said, "Let me say sorry to Miss Lu on her behalf." After saying that, he helped Ling Feng walk away. Both were named Ling, and the attitude of General Zhou Wei was completely different from Ling Feng. Lu Ya looked up at Xiao Ju and said, "You. No need to thank me." Xiao Ju waved his hand and said, "This is the cavalry guard, and it is my responsibility to maintain the order of the competition. I couldn't beat Ling Yun, but you saved me." Lu Ya looked at him and said, "After today's competition, I'll treat you to dinner." "Today?" Xiao Ju shook his head and said, "No, today I want to be with Tang Ning." "I have something to do." Tang Ning looked at him, waved her hand and said, "You and Miss Lu can go have dinner." On the other side, Ling Yun looked at Ling Feng, who had a bruised nose and face, and asked, "Why did you provoke that person from the Lu family? Am I provoking her?" The expression on Ling Feng's face was extremely angry, and he said angrily, "When did I provoke her? I just said that Xiao Ju was not a man, and she tripped me, and even hit me after tripping me. What does it have to do with me scolding Xiao Ju and her?" Ling Yun thought for a moment and said, "Maybe you have offended her in some way. No matter what, you should stay away from her. Although the Ling family is not afraid of the Lu family, they are not willing to easily offend the Minister of War, let alone the only daughter in the family of the Minister of War." Ling Feng wiped the corner of his mouth, glanced in that direction, and could only secretly think that he was unlucky. No one among the generals dared to mess with that lawless and crazy woman of the Lu family. He only hoped that she would get married as soon as possible and stop causing harm to others in Kyoto. Preparations for the competition have been completed, and both teams are warming up in their respective camps. Ling Yun is General Ziyu Linwei, so he will be here today. The two generals from the Zioki camp are not in the capital. For the time being, General Chen Zhonglang will make the decision. Lu Ya wants to treat me to dinner again today. Xiao Ju looked at Tang Ning and finally seemed to realize something. He couldn't believe it. "Do you think she really has something wrong with me?" Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "How about you go and ask?" "How can I ask such a question?" Xiao Ju retracted his head and said, What if she hits me again? He glanced at Lu Ya secretly and murmured, how could she like me? She's not blind. In the eyes of the women in the capital, there is no big difference between Xiaoju and Wei Jian. Perhaps the fact that he is handsomer than Wei Jian is a characteristic. Under such circumstances, if you can still like him for so many years, what is it if it's not true love? Xiaoju sat on the sidelines and began to doubt himself. After a gong sounded, the two teams entered the field from both sides. Wu Langzhong first read out the rules in front of the two teams. Even though no one liked hearing these, in order to reduce unnecessary disputes, these rules must be stated first. First, the weapons used by both teams are made of wood. Even so, they are not allowed to attack people's heads, vagina and other vital parts. Secondly, if the weapons are stained with white powder and white marks appear on the body, they will be eliminated, and someone from the Ministry of War will be on hand to remind them to prevent cheating. Third, the Zhou Zhaokai guard's head is covered with white cloth, and the Zhou Yulan guard's head is wrapped with red cloth to distinguish between friend and foe. If the commander's flag is taken away, or all team members are eliminated, it is considered a failure. These are the three main rules. After Wu Langzhong read them out, he retreated to the sidelines and sounded the second gong, marking the official start of the competition. The Zhou Wei commanded by Lu Teng was the first in the last competition, while the Zhou Zhaokai Wei was the second to last. There was a gap of 13 guards in the middle. Logically speaking, it should be a crushing situation. But after the gong sounded and the competition began, Zhou Wei's advantage was not as obvious as everyone expected. Instead, their formation was disrupted from the start. Nai Qian, a doctor in the Ministry of War, was beside Tang Ning. He looked at the chaos on the field and asked in surprise, what kind of play is this? When two armies confront each other, they usually have formations. Depending on the characteristics of the enemy and their own advantages, they form a square formation, a circular formation, a cone formation or a wild goose formation to face the enemy. However, the cavalry guard is in a mess without any formation. It can be said that he is just rushing forward. Although this style of play made the Habayashi guard's formation somewhat chaotic, rushing into the Habayashi guard's formation, even if it disrupted their formation, was a suicidal act. Even Lu Ya could see that the situation on the field was not right. She looked at Xiaoju and asked, what's going on with your cavalry guard? Their position was one of the best viewpoints on the field. Many people were standing here to watch. Ling Feng, who had just been beaten up by Lu Ya, stood beside Ling Yun. He was a little braver and looked at Lu Ten with disdain. Is this still the cavalry guard? What's the difference between a fight with street thugs? Xiaoju glanced at him and said, how about a bet? Ling Feng was stunned and asked, what bet? Xiaoju said, if the Yulan guard wins, I lose 10,000 taels to you. If the cavalry guard wins, you give me 10,000 taels. Do you dare to bet? Ling Feng opened his mouth and quickly closed it. Although he didn't think the cavalry guard had a chance to win, 10,000 taels was not a small amount. He wouldn't show off his ability for a while. If the cavalry guard really won and lost 10,000 taels to Xiaoju, wouldn't he be beaten to death by his father? Don't dare, Xiaoju looked at him and said, if you don't dare, then bet 1,000 taels. Do you dare to bet 1,000 taels? There are so many people watching here. Xiaoju has already said this. If he doesn't agree, it seems that he is afraid of him and that he has no confidence in the Yulan guard. Moreover, 1,000 taels is not too much. Ling Feng looked at him and said, okay, I'll bet with you. Xiaoju took out a few silver notes from his arms and said, this is 1,000 taels. Ling Feng looked at him and shook his head and said, I don't have that much. It doesn't matter. Just write a written agreement. Xiaoju pointed to the side and said, there is paper and pen here. Ling Feng looked at him and felt that something was wrong. He looked down and saw that the Yulin Guard still had an obvious advantage. There were obviously more people wearing red cloth than white cloth on the field. He settled down and picked up the pen to write a written agreement. "Are you crazy?" Lu Ya looked at Xiaoju and frowned. "Do you have too much money to spend? The cavalry guards are definitely going to lose against the Yulin guards, as can be seen from their disorganized play." In other words, Xiaoju's 1,000 taels were simply given to others by hand. Xiaoju looked at her and asked, "Do you want to bet too?" Lu Ya looked at him, clenched her fists angrily, and said, "Okay, let's bet." As soon as she finished speaking, 3 gongs suddenly sounded in her ears. 1 gong sounded to indicate the start of the competition, and 3 gongs sounded to indicate the end. In other words, the competition on the field has already been decided. Lu Ya's face was slightly stunned. Even if the Yulin guards were strong, it was impossible for them to eliminate all the cavalry guards so quickly. 1. Ling Feng was overjoyed. He looked forward and found that the atmosphere on the field was a little strange. Not only on the field, but also on the sidelines, the faces of the people watching were particularly strange. Dr. Wu stood there in a daze for a long time before he came to his senses, took 2 steps forward, and shouted in a hoarse voice, "In the first match, Zhou Xiaoyi won." Ling Feng's smile froze, and he said in disbelief, "How is this possible?" Dr. Wu turned around and explained, "Several people from Zhou Xiaoyi took advantage of the chaos to change the white cloth on their heads to red cloth, went around to the back of the Yulanwei camp, attacked the flag guards, and took down the Yulanwei general flag." Ling Feng stood there in a daze. General flag." Xiaoju took the document from Ling Feng and said, "The key to winning by surprise is to use troops. The art of war says, regular troops are the first, and surprise troops are the last. Whether you are the first or the last, you can defeat the enemy." After that, he looked at Lu Ya again and said, "Don't forget, you still owe me 1,000 taels, send it to my house before dark." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 451. In the 16 guards competition, you don't have to eliminate everyone on the other side to be considered a winner. Infinity Pine Sigma Apple Sigma Novel Infinity. To be precise, there is only one rule in the competition. The one who captures the opponent's commander's flag is the winner. If 2 armies are fighting, even if one side is defeated, the commander's flag will be protected. When the commander's flag is captured, it will be an army. When they were almost completely wiped out. Of course, if everyone is eliminated, capturing the flag is just a matter of the opponent reaching out. Because of this, in past competitions, no matter which guard, they valued the handsome flag very much and would not let the opponent attack under the handsome flag. But who would have thought that the cavalry guard's tactics completely disrupted the entire battle, and then he actually figured out how to take advantage of the chaos and pretend to be his opponent, and stole the commander's flag in an almost despicable way. If this is a battle between 2 armies, even if they steal the commander's flag, they will still be at a disadvantage and will eventually be annihilated. But this is a competition, and the rules are the rules. If the commander's flag is taken, no matter how much Habayashi Wei occupies the field, the advantage can also be considered as a loss. Ling Feng was stunned, looked at Wu Langzhong, and said loudly, "Do they think they have won?" Wu Langzhong nodded and said, "If one side's flag is captured, the competition ends. The one who captures the flag is the winner. This is the rule of the competition." You. Ling Feng had an angry look on his face and was about to speak, but was stopped by Ling Yun. Ling Yun looked at General Chen Zhonglang and said, "In this battle, our Zhou Wei lost. Each of the 4 teams in Group A has to compete with the other groups. Zhou Wei lost 1 game. Only by winning the next 2 games can he be guaranteed to be eliminated. In the first game of the competition, Zhou Wei, who was expected to compete for the first place, was placed in the hands of Zhou Xiaoyi, who was ranked at the bottom of the 16 guards, which greatly exceeded everyone's expectations. This game also set a record for the shortest trial period in the history of the 16th guards tournament. After all, except for Zhou Xiaoyi, no team has ever won by pretending to be their opponent and stealing their opponent's flag. Xiaoju clapped his hands, looked at Ling Feng, and said, "Don't forget the bet we made just now. 1,000 taels of silver will be delivered to my house before tomorrow." Ling Feng gritted his teeth and said, "If you win in such a shameless way, can you be considered a winner?" Xiaoju glanced at him and asked, "Do you want to deny it? If he denies the bet he just made in front of so many people now, how will he have any face in the capital in the future?" Ling Feng took a few deep breaths and said, "Isn't it just 1,000 taels of silver? I'll have someone deliver it to you soon." Seeing Xiaoju leaving triumphantly, Ling Feng clenched his fist, slammed it on the table, and said angrily, "This shameless person." Ling Yun looked at Zhou Yue and Zhou Xiaoyi who were leaving the battlefield one after another. His face became slightly solemn, and he said, "Do you really think Zhou Xiaoyi relied on conspiracy?" Ling Feng said bitterly, "Except for using conspiracy and tricks, how can they defeat the Yulin guards?" Ling Yun looked at the field and said, "Zhou Xiaoyi is no longer the Zhou Xiaoyi he used to be. The Zhaoqi camp held 4 games every day. After Xiaoju won the first game, nothing happened. As the head of the military department, Tang Ning could not leave the field. He originally planned to lose the first game, but since Xiaoju wanted to win, it didn't hurt to win one. The rules of the 16 guards competition are like playing chess. Both sides can use any moves, but they must ensure that their handsome generals and generals are not killed. If the handsome generals and generals are eaten, no matter how many rooks are left, a horse or a few cannons is considered a loss. If you win Zhou Yue in this way, others will at most think that Zhou Xiaoyi is cunning. The same strategy will not be effective the second time, and the impact on the odds is almost negligible. Xiao family. The young master is back. Seeing Xiaoju walking in from the outside, the Xiao family's concierge immediately saluted. Xiaoju stopped, looked at him and asked, "Is the old man at home?" The servant said, "The master is in the garden." In the Xiao mansion garden, an old man was hunched over, holding a flower hoe in his hand, loosening the soil for some plants. There were no servants in the garden, and the old man's back looked a little lonely. Xiaoju stood at the entrance of the garden, his pace gradually slowed down, and finally he paused. There are only 2 masters in the Xiao mansion, so naturally they don't need many servants. With the small number of people, the big house seems empty and lonely. He has errands to attend to, and he leaves early and comes back late. If Lu Yai hadn't often come over to drink and chat with the old man, he would. A person does not know what it will be like to be alone. This was one of the reasons why he still didn't care about her despite being beaten repeatedly. Mr. Xiao put down his flower hoe, looked back at him, and asked, "Didn't you compete with Zhou Yue today and lose so quickly? Why did you lose?" Xiaoju strode over and said, "As for Zhou Yue and those people, it takes less than a stick of incense to defeat them. Seeing that they win, I will come back." "Did you win?" Mr. Xiao looked at him with a look of surprise on his face and asked, "Did you poison Zhou Yue's food?" Xiaoju looked at him and asked, "Zhou Xiaoyi is your soldier, you don't even trust your soldiers." "It's because they are my soldiers that I know what kind of virtue they are." Mr. Xiao glanced at him and asked, "Isn't it poison? Did you take advantage of them not paying attention during the competition and kill Zhou Yue? The handsome flag was stolen." Xiaoju coughed and said, "That is called victory by surprise, and defeating the enemy without fighting is the highest level of tactics." Mr. Xiao glanced at him and asked, "Did that boy named Tang teach you this again?" Xiaoju puffed up his chest and asked, "Couldn't it be me who came up with it?" "Your mind is not that bright." Mr. Xiao shook his head and said, "If it was poisoning, I still believe it was you." "I. Old Xiao." Xiaoju was about to open his mouth to defend, but was interrupted. He turned around and saw Lu Ya walking in from outside. "It's Ya." Seeing Lu Ya, Mr. Xiao showed a smile on his face and said, "You're here just in time to play 2 games of chess with the old man." After speaking, he glanced at Xiaoju and said, "What are you doing here? Let the kitchen prepare the food. I will have 2 drinks with Ya later." Xiaoju glanced at Lu Ya and left reluctantly. When he came back, he saw the old man looking at him with an evil look. Mr. Xiao looked at him with an evil look and said, "I heard that you defrauded Ya of 1,000 taels of silver." Xiaoju immediately said, "What a lie, she lost to me." He looked at Lu Ya and asked, "Do you want to default on your debt?" Lu Ya looked at Mr. Xiao timidly and said, "Mr. Xiao, look at him. How did I teach you since you were a child? You can even cheat girls out of their money." Seeing Mr. Xiao start to look around, as if he was looking for some weapon, Xiaoju immediately said, "No, I just fought with her. What a joke, how could I possibly win her money?" "That's pretty much it." Mr. Xiao glanced at him, rummaged through the chess box, and said in surprise, "Why can't I find my horse? You talk to Ya first, and I'll go look for it in the study." "Your horse?" Xiaoju wanted to say that he had just seen him put the horse into his sleeves, but when he opened his mouth, Mr. Xiao shot him back with a sharp look. After Mr. Xiao left, Lu Yake looked at him and said, "I don't have that much money now. I owe you 1,000 taels of silver. I will pay you back slowly in the future." Xiaoju murmured in her heart, she couldn't tell clearly how long it would take, a month, a year, or 10 or decades. If she paid him back a few pennies a day, wouldn't she have to pay him back for the rest of her life? He waved his hand magnanimously and said, "Forget it, I don't want it anymore." "No," Lu Ya patted the table and said, "What I owe you is what I owe you. Don't worry, you will definitely be able to pay it back in this life." Xiaoju looked at her, thinking about what Tang Ning said to him today, and suddenly said, "Can I ask you a question?" Lu Ya looked at him and asked, "What's the question? Just ask it." "I have a friend who likes someone, but she often bullies him." Xiaoju thought for a while and asked, "Do you think she is sick?"